for the most part, only males will inherit. So sons will inherit territory. Because I guess it's a patriarchy too.
It's a patriarchy? Patriarchy, what the heck? Birds? Gotta be better than that.
I know, right?
I had a very hard time leaving home for college. I was not excited to move. I was nervous about meeting new people, establishing new friendships, and being away from all of the things that made me feel safe. My family, Lake Huron, my little garden of ferns and wild orchids. But I did it anyways. Did I consider dropping out and moving home? Yes. Did I often dread going to class? Yes. Was I very, very awkward meeting new people? 100%. But I persisted and eventually thrived. And since that first move away from home, I've moved from place to place as my life progressed. Always lucky that I had the next thing. If I'd ever moved home, I might have been called a boomerang kid, a young adult who left the nest and then came back. Usually this has a negative connotation, but this can happen for many reasons. Maybe to save money, maybe to help aging parents, maybe for better Wi-Fi, but sometimes to help raise younger siblings. And this cooperation can feel very unique to humans. And some folks might think that humans are the only species with boomerang kids or relatives that take care of other relatives. But in the bird world, the strategy also exists, and it's fascinating, and honestly a bit unexpected. Which brings us to the topic of today's episode. Okay, but why do some birds babysit? And I'm particularly excited to talk to today's guest, who's been a dear friend of mine for many years. The truth is, some birds don't just hang around after fledging, though some do. Many also actively help raise their younger siblings, feed them, protect them, babysit them while mom and dad get some air. This phenomenon is called cooperative breeding, and it flips the script on what we think bird families are supposed to look like. In species like Florida scrub jays and purple-crowned fairy wrens, many siblings and half-siblings pitch in to raise the next generation. Sometimes it's even unrelated individuals who are helping out at the nest. It's not failure to launch, it's family hustle. So what's in it for them? Why help raise someone else's chicks instead of striking out on your own? And how do these extended family systems affect everything from survival rates to social dynamics? Today, we'll explore this surprisingly complex world of bird family life. It's sweet, it's strategic, and sometimes it's a little soap opera-y. Helping us decode this family drama is Dr. Nancy Chen, an assistant professor in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at UCLA, who has studied how these avian households form, function, and sometimes fall apart. Stay tuned. It's great to see you, and thanks for joining us to talk about cooperative breeding.
I'm happy to be here.
So I wanted to start off just by helping people understand what it is. So what is cooperative breeding and how common is it in birds?
Yeah, so cooperative breeding is this cool reproductive behavior that we see in actually lots of animals. So it's not just birds. Mammals do it. Some people can argue that humans are cooperative breeders. But basically, it's this behavior where offspring will wait to leave home and have babies of their own and stick around and help their parents raise kind of future generations of offspring. So oftentimes they're helping raise full siblings or half siblings, but sometimes we also see unrelated individuals actually helping out with parental care.
So cooperative breeding, like you said, you could consider humans to be cooperative breeders in a lot of cases. It's across the kind of animal kingdom. But from a bird perspective, are there any species that are most famous for cooperative breeding behavior?
I would say there's several corvids that are known as cooperative breeding. Also, for some reason, I don't know why, but Australia, so many birds in Australia are cooperative breeders.
Oh, interesting.
If people are familiar with fairy wrens, which are these teeny tiny songbirds, those are pretty famous cooperative breeders. In terms of birds in North America that folks might see or recognize, crows are cooperative breeders. And then the birds I work on, scrub jays, the Florida scrub jays specifically, are also cooperative breeders. And they're one of the first species that in which this behavior has been described.
Oh, cool. Specifically in Florida scrub jays or just scrub jays in general?
Just Florida scrub jays. So there's multiple different species of scrub jays in North America, but only the ones in Florida are cooperative breeders. There's like a huge range of reproductive behavior across scrub jays.
Oh, that's really interesting that even within a species or very, very closely related species, you'd have that kind of variation in reproductive behavior.
So within the genus of scrub jays, we range from kind of your classic monogamous species. So the California scrub jays are completely monogamous. And then there's a species of scrub jays on the Channel Islands, on Santa Cruz Island. So these islands off the coast of California. The island scrub jay, they have delayed dispersal and delayed reproduction, but the offspring don't actually help with parental care. And it's only in the Florida scrub jays where you get delayed dispersal and helping.
Interesting. There's definitely a Florida man joke in there about delayed dispersal and helping raise your family, but I'm not sure exactly what it is.
Yeah.
When you say monogamous, though, just to clarify, you mean socially monogamous, but not necessarily genetically. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
California jays are socially monogamous, and they have higher rates of extra pair paternity. So they're not genetically monogamous.
Yeah, for our listeners who are interested in that topic, so genetic versus social monogamy, go back and listen to episode 1 from this season. Why would a bird delay its own reproduction to help raise its siblings instead of it, why would it do that instead of having its own offspring?
That's a great question. And it's been a question that's interested evolutionary biologists and people interested in bird behavior for a very long time. I was thinking about this. I think it's a kind of funny reflection on us as humans or on how evolution works. People are really interested in cooperative breeding because it's weird to have individuals helping other individuals. I guess evolution assumes every individual has to be inherently selfish. So there's multiple different theories that explain why this cooperative behavior has evolved. And they're largely divided into 2 different arguments. One argument is called kind of inclusive fitness or kin selection. And so this was a theory proposed by a scientist, W.D. Hamilton, that most of the time if the helpers are helping closely related offspring, then they gain what's called indirect genetic benefits. So essentially, for instance, if I were to help my parents raise like my brother and I, because we're closely related, we would share a lot of our genetic makeup, right? And so if the benefits accrued, if I kind of improve the survival or reproductive success of my siblings by helping to care for them and raise them, those benefits kind of weighted by how much of my genetic material would be passed on, like via my siblings having offspring, if that outweighs any costs of my decision to delay reproducing myself, then you would expect to see cooperative breeding behavior, this cooperation, evolve. So that's called kin selection. But there's also a growing kind of number of studies that show that there may also be direct benefits to helpers themselves or direct fitness benefits. So it might be beneficial for a given individual to not leave immediately and help raise other offspring if it helps them survive longer or if it helps them be able to produce more offspring later on in their lives. Like they could be gaining skills, or there may be benefits to living in large groups. So there's a lot of different hypotheses out there about the evolution of this behavior.
Very cool. Yeah. And so in a sense then, I mean, the kin selection, well, either way, like the behavior is maybe being favored because of a selfish thing for that individual. Like their genes indirectly go further if they help their siblings, or they're more protected from predation, or they have longer to learn or whatever. Depending on which of those hypotheses you think about, that's really cool. What are some of the risks then for these helpers that people think about in the context of this evolved behavior?
I mean, the biggest thing I think is you'll likely produce fewer offspring yourself, right? Especially for species where they might wait many, many years before they start breeding themselves. Oftentimes, an individual will die before they even get a chance to try to reproduce. So there's kind of like a cost benefit. There could be a little bit of bet hedging that individuals are doing, trying to figure out what is the best way to maximize kind of how much of their genome gets passed on to future generations.
Yeah. So with the scrub jays, the Florida scrub jays in particular that you study, like what's the longest, because you have this amazing pedigree of scrub jays that you should tell everyone about because it's just a mind-blowing data set. But like what's the longest you've seen an individual wait to actually engage in its own reproduction after being a helper?
I mean, we definitely have many, many individuals who never become breeders.
Really? They're just always helpers.
Yep. My collaborator, Fitz, he always says that a whole scrub jay's main purpose in life is to establish as a breeder. Like once you've become a breeder, you've made it. But sometimes, like we've seen some individuals wait 4 to 5 or more years before they actually become breeders. So it's quite a long time that individuals are just waiting around, waiting for a new opportunity to arise.
Yeah. So, I mean, if they're waiting 4 or 5 years, I think mostly about chickadees, which generally, average lifespan is 2. Sometimes they can live all the way to 10 or 11. But what's like the average lifespan of a scrub jay related to that, like waiting 4 to 5 years to reproduce?
Yeah. Well, turns out the average lifespan, if you're considering everyone in the population, it's only 1.5 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Largely because 70% of individuals die within their first year. But if you make it as a breeder, then on average, breeders will live about 5 years. Maximum now is 16. I think it's our oldest recorded individual.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I think for folks listening, that 70% of individuals dying, within a year or so of hatching is not too out of the norm for birds that lay a lot of eggs, I guess, is the simplest way to say it. There are like these live fast, kind of die young birds where, chickadees, about half of a population or of the juveniles will die every winter. So, okay. So I guess an obvious question comes up if there's these individuals waiting and then becoming reproductive, like what's the trigger to go from, oh, I'm a helper to now I'm going to actually raise my own chicks?
I think it's all about opportunities. So the Florida scrub jays, they're restricted to this really unique, dry, fire-maintained habitat, scrub habitat in Florida. It's very different from what people classically think of. Like it's not the Everglades, it's not marshy, it's not wet, it's very dry and sandy.
And beautiful. It's so nice there.
And beautiful. I love the scrub. And these jays are habitat specialists, so they're really restricted to these scrub habitats. And because of habitat destruction, there's very little kind of high quality scrub habitat left for these jays, which means that in many areas with high quality scrub, such as our primary study site at Archbold Biological Station, so it's this big, beautiful, continuous patch of scrub that's been carefully maintained for decades. And what that means is we go out and we burn the scrub regularly because it's fire adapted. There's a lot of fire adapted species. And so the fire cycle is really important. The scrub jays have basically saturated this habitat. You can think of them as just like sardines packed in a can. So to be able to become a breeder, these birds need to become the socially dominant pair in a given territory. So another thing I forgot to mention is that Florida scrub jays are highly territorial. They stay in the same place year round and kind of defend their territory, this kind of up to 15 hectare area. That's their home turf. Generally, scrub jays are waiting for an older breeder to die so they can replace them. Very rarely we see formation of de novo or completely new territories. Or sometimes an enterprising young scrub jay will try to carve off a portion of their parents' territory and then expand it. That process is what we call budding. But for the most part, they're just trying to find opportunities. And oftentimes they just have to wait for someone to die to replace them.
How many of the breeding pairs have helpers? Like, is it every breeding pair has helpers or only some? And if it's only some, do you see like reproductive differences between pairs that have helping individuals versus pairs that don't have helpers?
There's quite a bit of variation in group sizes in the scrub jays. There are several breeding pairs who will have 0 helpers, and then some will have up to 7.
Wow, 7 helpers?
So there's a pretty big, I think that's the biggest, yeah.
That's crazy.
There was this one group in a territory that we called Hilltop when I was a graduate student that had 7 helpers and was a really big, just like a giant family.
Wow.
There's mixed evidence. So there are some studies that show that Florida scrub jay helpers do increase offspring survival. There's an interesting interaction with territory size.
Okay.
So in small territories, if you have too many helpers, it can actually be bad for the offspring because then they end up competing for limited resources.
Okay.
So do helpers help? Sometimes, but not always.
Right. It's more context dependent than maybe you'd intuitively think. But yeah, territory size, if that's the only place food is coming from and you have 7 helpers, you might actually not have enough food for your chicks. So then in that context, is it driven by genetics, the environment, a combo, or like what's the latest understanding of this kind of helping behavior?
That's a great question. And I would say for most species, we don't know.
Yeah.
We haven't tried to ask whether or not helping behavior is genetically determined in the scrub jays. I think it's a very complex behavior, and so it's hard to figure that out. There have been studies in other species. I can think of at least one paper that showed that this helping behavior was heritable, and so it means it was kind of passed on genetically, but I think jury's still out.
Yeah, and like to really understand if something has a genetic basis, the sample sizes and all of that you need are quite large. And if the behavior is complex like this, which is just like helping, I can imagine it would be difficult to ever really pinpoint. But as we've been talking about, like environmental variation has to play a role to some extent, even if it is something that can evolve. That environmental variation probably influences the likelihood of that.
Yeah, and I think there's also a lot of chance.
Yeah.
Right. So like if you're lucky and the breeder next door dies, then there's a breeding opportunity right there that you're aware of. So it's like when I think about helping behavior, at least in the scrub jays, I feel like a lot of it just has to do with the environment and chance events like breeding opportunities.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, the scrub jays have such restricted habitat and they need to be in this place. I wonder how that translates across the other cooperative breeders. Like you were talking about fairy wrens, and I think like superb starlings are also cooperative breeders. Is that right?
They're cooperative, yeah. And the idea there is that cooperation helps groups survive under really, really like unpredictable environments.
Right, yeah. So in those cases where having extra birds to help feed chicks in a random, unpredictable drought or something like that, you might increase overall fitness, which is, it's interesting to think about those different drivers, environmental variability or predictability or just habitat constraints in the case of the Florida scrub jay. We've already kind of touched on this, but how often do helpers inherit their parents' territory? Like, is that a common thing that it kind of goes, the inheritance chain is direct, or is it often neighbors, or is there even a pattern?
Individuals can definitely inherit territory, but what's annoying is that there's a sex bias.
Oh,
so
Jesus.
In scrub jays, for the most part, only males will inherit. So sons will inherit territory. Because I guess it's a patriarchy too.
It's a patriarchy? Patriarchy, what the heck? Birds? Gotta be better than that.
I know, right? But yeah, it's so annoying. Like males are always socially dominant to females. And so males are the ones who are likely to inherit territory if one of their parents dies. And that is why we think females leave home earlier and also move further away.
Oh, interesting. So they're like further dispersers, they leave younger.
Mhm.
I guess, yeah, if the dominance hierarchy is kind of established that way. Importantly for anyone listening, that's not always the direction of a dominance hierarchy in birds. There's lots of interesting examples of female individuals holding territories and being kind of the dominant ones. Like phalaropes are, I think, an interesting example of that.
In chicanas.
Oh, yeah, and chicanas, exactly. Yeah, Sarah Lipschitz's work on chicanas is really interesting. But yeah, the patriarchy. From a longer term perspective, do you think like this cooperative breeding is kind of a stable strategy or?
It's interesting because you would predict different things depending on what aspect you think matters the most for
Right.
like the survival of a population. So for instance, from a genetic perspective, cooperative breeding means that fewer individuals in a population will actually be reproducing and contributing to the gene pool in future generations. And that can reduce the amount of genetic diversity because essentially, like the reproducing population that matters is smaller than the actual kind of number of individuals or number of adults in a population. And so that could be detrimental.
Right.
But from kind of a demographic perspective, it can actually be really helpful to have all of these adult non-breeding individuals floating around in the population because it can buffer population size changes over time. And we've seen this in the Florida scrub jays where if there's a year with really low breeder survival, so a lot of breeders die, the population size doesn't crash because there's just this whole suite of non-breeders just waiting to take their places. And so it can provide a buffering effect.
That's cool. I'd never thought about that buffering effect of just having these ready to go individuals floating around and then they can take over, if breeders die for whatever reason. I mean, from an inbreeding perspective, we know, well, in general, like inbreeding reduces genetic variation. It can lead to the expression of deleterious or negative bad traits, for example, if you're very inbred. In theory, we know that, but then your work on scrub jays kind of really showed some of those consequences really nicely, right?
Yeah, so we've spent a lot of time thinking about consequences of inbreeding and also immigration, so movement of individuals into our study population. So the Florida scrub jays are an endangered species because it's a small population and they don't move very far. They often pair with relatives. Or inbreeding, and that's bad. And we showed that it's bad for fitness. We've also shown that kind of a lot of birds moving in, very important for keeping levels of inbreeding down.
Right. So bringing in new genetic variants from other neighboring populations and preventing that reduction in genetic diversity. Yeah. I think like the work on the scrub jays is really what shows the theory in a lot of ways is right about like the importance of other alleles coming in. I mean, the work on, it's always Florida for some reason. Florida panthers also, which were very, very inbred, or Florida cougars, or whatever you want to call them, mountain lions, but not living in mountains, were very inbred in Florida until they brought those like handful, I think it was 7 or 8 individuals from Texas.
From Texas.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then we call that like genetic rescue, basically. Yeah. Yeah, so you mentioned Archbold Biological Station, which is in like the Lake Wales Ridge region in Florida. I know the scrub jay study there has been going on for a very long time, and it would be great to hear more about it. And was that the population of scrub jays where people kind of really started studying cooperative breeding?
Yeah, so one of the textbook examples of cooperative breeding is the Florida scrub jay. Glenn Wolfenden in the late 60s kind of noticed these birds living in groups and started banding birds. So all the individuals have this unique set of color bands on their legs to make it easy to identify different individuals in the field. So the population monitoring has just kind of increased in geographic area, and they've been using standard field protocols to monitor the population for more than 50 years now.
Wow.
Which is really incredible. And there's a ton of data. It's like Big Brother on steroids. So every individual is individually marked. There's a team that goes out to census the entire population once a month. So once a month we go and I'm using the royal we here. Um,
Yeah.
we we go out to every single territory and
Mhm.
mark who is still alive.
Wow.
So we know exactly how long different individuals live in
Mhm.
our population, mostly. We are assuming that if we don't see an individual, that it died, not that it moved out of our study site.
Mhm.
And then during the breeding season, there's a whole field team that goes out and finds the nest of on every single territory.
Mhm.
I think on average, it takes like 9 people hours to find a single nest. And so you
Wow.
can imagine the amount of work that goes into this. And then every nest is tracked um, very closely. So we know exactly when birds start laying eggs, how many eggs are laid, how many of those eggs hatch, and
Mhm.
then the fates of all of the nestlings that are born.
Wow. That's, yeah, for folks listening, that having that kind of data set for a wild population is extremely rare, especially one that's that long. Like 50 years of really, really continuous data is just incredible. And that's kind of what allows you to ask a lot of the questions that we're talking about, the benefits, the long-term benefits, because you need to know like how long does an individual live and what is its fitness, its reproductive output to really understand the drivers of, potentially cooperative breeding or whatever. And I don't think we think about it, but it's hard to know how long an animal lives unless it's in a zoo, right? If it's this wild, free living thing, it's hard to track and hard to measure. So, yeah, the Florida scrub jay system is pretty amazing for that reason.
I feel very lucky to get to work with the jays. Also, they're just really fun to work with. There's more and more studies showing that there's a lot of variation,
Hmm.
even within cooperative breeders. So, how much different individuals help may vary. It may vary by sex, it may vary by relatedness. I think there's
Hmm.
a lot of complexity in the decisions that these animals are making in the wild day to day.
Yeah, and our ability to even study that is has changed over time, right? Like historically, we would be physically watching these interactions and trying to understand, like, in the context of birds, who's provisioning or whatever. The relatedness piece is a more recent development that we can actually analyze with genetics. And then some of these more nuanced behaviors or small behavioral variations, like you really have to be observing in very different, multiple different ways to figure out what's going on. And I think yeah, it's important to remember it's hard to study these things. So knowing
Yeah.
exactly what's going on is challenging.
Yeah. And like technology can help in some cases. So there's very well tracking technology that's being developed that can help monitor individual movements right across the
Hmm.
landscape, which matters, or even measure when two individuals come within a close enough distance and interact, or cameras, right? Can we just put up, oftentimes now you can just put up a camera and then record footage and analyze that later instead of sitting out there yourself
Yeah. But
watching, which is nice. Except in the scrub jays, they're too smart and we can't actually put video cameras out.
really, what did they do? They just avoid them or attack
I
them
think
or
they abandoned the nest.
really? Oh, wow. They're wary of Big Brother watching them. At least now, I mean, from an analyzing perspective, when you have thousands of hours of video, you can train an algorithm to track it. But
Yeah. Yeah.
that's still kind of in its infancy in a lot of ways from a wildlife tracking perspective. But okay, so we've reached the part of the show that we call That's BS or That's Bird Stuff, where we give our guests an opportunity to debunk a myth that ruffles their feathers. So Nancy, what do you want to call BS on?
What I want to call BS on is this common misunderstanding that if you see a baby bird on the ground, that you need to go rescue it.
Ah,
Turns out most baby birds on the ground are probably fine and you should just leave them alone.
and by probably fine, you mean they're out of the nest because they did that on purpose. They're fledging, right?
So most baby birds that people see are what we call fledglings. So they have
Hmm.
feathers, they just are small and have no tail and look like a baby because they are a baby. But these are birds that have already left the nest. So if you try to put them back in the nest, that won't work. They'll just hop right back out.
Hmm.
And they're not alone. Their parents will be around, probably looking for food to feed that bird. So, most cases, when you see a baby bird, don't touch it. It's fine. If you move it, you might be taking it away from its parents. The one exception is sometimes you might see a baby bird that's very clearly a nestling. So it'll be naked. It'll have giant eyes that are probably closed or mostly closed. And in those cases, if you can find the nest, then you can try putting the bird back in the nest if you can access it without destroying it.
Yeah, definitely. And for our listeners, a couple episodes ago, Dr. Fan Bonnier pointed out that it's totally fine to touch a baby bird. So in this case, if the bird looks very, very young, no feathers, very closed eyes, you can try to put it back in the nest and it'll be totally fine. But otherwise, just wait and watch and you'll probably see the parents come by to feed the fledgling that has feathers and is already out of the nest on purpose. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Nancy. It's been really awesome to think about cooperative breeding and birds and hear more about these amazing Florida scrub jays.
Thank you for having me.
Birds are dinosaurs, and around here we like our snacks. So we end each episode with a dinosaur nugget. Today's dinosaur nugget is that in a lot of bird species, raising chicks is so demanding or risky that parents don't always do it alone. Instead, you get babysitters at the nest. Sometimes those helpers are close relatives, boosting their inclusive fitness by helping kin survive, even if they don't breed that season. Other times, babysitting is more like training or insurance. Helpers gain experience, are more likely to survive, and provide backup when conditions get rough. Either way, bird babysitting isn't altruism gone wild. It's an evolved strategy shaped by ecology, social structure, and the very real price tag of reproduction. That's a wrap on this week's episode. Okay, but why do some birds babysit? If you like this episode, leave a comment, follow, and subscribe. I mean it. What are you bird curious about? Let us know in the comments or through Instagram at OkayButBirds. Bye! Okay, But Birds is hosted by Scott Taylor, with production and creative by Zach Carl.